Diatheke, is an ancient Greek word that means covenant or testament, as in a binding agreement or legal disposition. In everyday classical Greek, it often referred to a last will and testament, a one-sided legal arrangement where someone disposes of their property after death. However, in the context of the Bible, both the Greek translation of the Old Testament, called the Septuagint, and the New Testament, it is the standard word used to translate the Hebrew berith, which means a solemn covenant, pact, or alliance, especially one initiated by God with humanity or with the people of Israel. Key points about the meaning. It is not usually a mutual contract negotiated equally by two parties. The Greek word for that would be Suntheke. Instead, Diatheke often emphasizes a unilateral disposition or promise from a superior party, God, to a lesser one, with conditions or blessings attached. In the New Testament, it appears 33 times and is translated as either covenant or testament, depending on context. The idea of a testament, will, ties into the theme of death making the arrangement effective. See Hebrews 9:16-17, which Christians connect to Jesus' death establishing the new covenant. I palαια diatheke, he palαια diatheke. This phrase literally means the Old Covenant or the Old Testament. Palαια, requel, old, or ancient. So he palαια diatheke is the standard Greek title for the Old Testament, the first major part of the Christian Bible, consisting of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Law, prophets, and writings. It is used in contrast with hekene diatheke. He kaine diatheke means the New Testament or the New Covenant. This division reflects Christian theology. The Old Covenant, palαια diatheke, refers to God's relationship with Israel through the law given at Sinai, Moses, the promises to Abraham, etc., the scriptures written before Jesus. The New Covenant, kaine diathekes, refers to the relationship established through Jesus Christ, his life, death, and resurrection, which fulfills and extends the old one to all humanity. Jesus himself speaks of the new covenant, in my blood, Luke 22:20, 1 Corinthians 11:25. Early Christians from around the 2nd to 3rd century onward began using these terms to distinguish the two collections of sacred writings that together form the Christian Bible. The Old Testament makes up the larger portion, about 3/4 of the Bible, and was the only scripture that Jesus and the apostles quoted and used. Summary: in simple terms, Diatheke equals covenant, testament, a binding divine arrangement or promise. He palαια diatheke equals the Old Testament, the Old Covenant section of the Bible. This terminology is why we still call the two parts of the Christian Bible the Old Testament and the New Testament today in many languages. The Greek term highlights the idea of God's progressive revelation and relationship with people through solemn, promise-based agreements. If you're reading this in a biblical or theological context, it often carries rich meaning about God's faithfulness, promises, and how the coming of Christ relates to earlier scriptures. Let me know if you'd like examples from specific Bible verses or more details. Diatheke, and Suntheke, are two related but distinct Greek words, both of which can relate to agreements. The difference is important in biblical studies because the Bible, especially the Septuagint, Greek Old Testament, and the New Testament, deliberately prefers diatheke for God's covenants. 1. Etymology and basic meanings. Diatheke comes from diatithmi. Diatithmi equals to arrange, dispose, or set in order. In classical and everyday Greek, especially in the Hellenistic period, it most commonly meant a last will and testament, a unilateral legal disposition of property that takes effect after the testator's death. It is one-sided. The maker decides everything, and the beneficiaries simply receive, no negotiation required. It can also mean a general arrangement, disposition, or ordinance. Suntheke, comes from syntithmi, equals to put together, agree upon. The prefix syn means together with. This is the standard classical Greek word for a mutual agreement, contract, treaty, or covenant depending two or more parties. It implies negotiation, mutual consent, and often equality, or at least reciprocity between the parties, like a modern bilateral contract. 2. Key difference, unilateral versus bilateral. Diatheke emphasizes a one-sided disposition or sovereign arrangement. One party, usually the superior, sets the terms. The other party accepts or benefits from it. It does not require equal standing or mutual negotiation. Suntheke emphasizes a joint agreement reached together. Both parties contribute to the terms, implying some level of equality or reciprocity. In human legal contexts, a will, diatheke, you die, and your heirs get what you decided, no input from them. A contract, treaty, suntheke, two parties sit down and hammer out terms both must agree to. 3. Why the Bible uses diatheke, not suntheke, for God's covenants. The Hebrew word berith means covenant, a solemn binding relationship or promise, often sealed with blood or a ritual, to cut a covenant. When Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, the Septuagint, 1932nd century BC, they almost always chose diatheke for berith, nearly 300 times. They used Suntheke only rarely, once or twice, and other words like entole, commandments, even less. Reasons for this choice, widely accepted by scholars. God's covenant is not a negotiation between equals. God is the sovereign initiator who unilaterally establishes the terms, promises, and obligations. Humans respond in faith and obedience, but they do not bargain as equals. Suntheke carried too strong a connotation of mutual, equal partner agreement, common in Greek diplomacy and contracts. Using it might have suggested God and man were on the same level, which biblical theology rejects. Diatheke better captured the idea of a gracious, sovereign disposition from the stronger party, God, to the weaker, humanity. It highlights God's initiative, faithfulness, and the binding, legal character of his promises. The New Testament follows the same pattern. Diatheke appears 33 times, almost always meaning covenant, in the biblical sense, God's relationship with his people. Suntheke does not appear at all in the New Testament. In a few places, especially Hebrews 9:15-17, the testament, will aspect of diatheke is deliberately played upon. A covenant, like a will, is ratified by death, pointing to Jesus' sacrificial death, establishing the new covenant in his blood. 4. Theological implications. Using diatheke stresses grace and sovereignty. The covenant is God's gift and promise, not a deal we negotiate. We enter it by faith and obedience, not by equal bargaining. It allows the New Testament authors to connect the Old Covenant with Israel and the New Covenant through Christ as two stages of the same divine plan, both initiated by God. Some theologians, especially in Reformed traditions, note that this word choice highlights the unilateral nature of the covenant of grace. God commits himself fully, even when humans fail. In short, Suntheke, a mutual contract between roughly equals. Diatheke, a sovereign arrangement or disposition, often like a will, initiated by one superior party. This is why English Bibles translate the biblical diatheke as covenant in most places, AG, Old Covenant, New Covenant, while keeping the legal testament nuance alive in contexts like Hebrews 9. The choice of diatheke by the Septuagint translators was intentional and theologically rich. It protects the biblical view of God as the gracious, sovereign covenant maker. If you'd like specific Bible verses compared, examples from the Septuagint, or how this plays out in books like Galatians or Hebrews, just let me know.